My name is David, and I'm here to talk about the American Filipino riots. What? There were riots? Yes, riots between Filipinos and people with this color skin. Wasn't it just some guy, a foreigner, who got drunk in the barangay and he shut off his mouth and the Filipinos roughed him up? No, that does happen, but that's not what we're talking about here. Wait a second, I've never heard it. Hear me out. Just imagine this. A bunch of foreigners come in. They're dressed a little nicer. They are flashing some cash and they start dating local women. There's resentment amongst the local males. And what happens? Well, riots. By riots, I mean knives escalating to guns, guns escalating to people shot and killed, buildings burned down, and bombings. The match that lit the flame with the riot was a news outlet. This news outlet posted a picture of a foreigner. He wasn't one of these old expats in the Philippines in their 70s or 60s or 80s. He was younger, 25 by some sources, 23 by other sources. And there was a picture of him with his girlfriend, who was, beep, I'm not going to say the age, and her sister, who was 11. They were local women. A mob saw this picture in a newspaper. They formed outside of where he lives. They dragged him outside. They roughed him up. He was arrested. He spent 9 months in jail. The locals were still angry. There were these clubs called taxi clubs. And at taxi clubs, foreigners could spend money to have short-term relationship with local women. This taxi club was actually owned by foreigners. A group formed outside the club, locals. They were going to burn the place down. The foreigners who owned the club, they had shotguns, they rigged them up with salt, and they were able to spray the crowd with salt and disperse the crowd without there being real damage to anyone who was trying to riot outside of the club. The foreigners started to band together. They wanted revenge. They met up on a bridge called the Pajaro River Bridge with a group of locals, and they started to fight. And, each side was pretty much even. But then there was a completely different group joined. And the foreigners who were dating the local women, they lost big time. The mobs formed. They were dragging foreigners out of their homes. They were throwing them off this bridge. I drove down to this bridge and I took a video. The riots took place in January. The images you see of the bridge are during the dry season, not January, the rainy season. This is a river, and they were throwing foreigners into the river. Other areas started to riot. There were incidents such as at a local fair/carnival. The locals, I'm not making this up, started shooting rubber bands at a group of foreigners with their local lady friends. One of the foreigners took umbrage to this and stabbed one or two people and then ran away in the confusion. Well, you stab a couple of locals, and suddenly there's going to be a mob of more locals. They burned down places that rented or housed foreigners. They were dragging them out. They were throwing rocks at their cars. They were beating them up. Things escalated. They were shooting into places where foreigners live. A guy was shot through the heart while hiding in his closet. In another situation, the foreigners were running from a mob. One guy was shot in the back and killed. Yes, this all happened. There were other incidents. There was a bombing at a club. And when I say a club, I mean more like a civic society. I don't mean a drinking establishment, more like a place where foreigners could congregate. There were cases near the Pajaro River Bridge where the police had to take all the foreigners into a city building and protect them. There were other times where the police in other areas led the rioters. In one situation, the fire department had to turn hoses on the locals to break up a mob. The real source of the riots comes from the fact that there were 14 male foreigners for every one female foreigner that came into the country. There were no foreigner on foreigner relationships because no foreign women were allowed in the country. Well, I don't understand. I thought women could just get into the Philippines. Oh, we're not talking about American women or English women or New Zealand women coming into the Philippines. We're talking about Filipinos coming to America. America in 1930 was letting in Filipino agricultural workers, but they wanted them to be male. They were allowed into the country because the Philippines was a U.S. protectorate, like Guam or Puerto Rico, and Filipinos could just come in and they could work in the United States and undercut the local wages. Now, I'm not making excuses here. Filipinos came over, then the Great Depression hit. Suddenly, you have a large number of agricultural workers. You have unemployed Filipinos, unemployed people like me. You have unemployed Latinos. And this is where the issue started. That incident on the Pajaro River Bridge, where you had a bunch of people who looked like me and a bunch of Filipinos fighting on the bridge, the people who tagged in to help the locals were Hispanics, predominantly Mexicans, because they were also losing their jobs. In those days, there were not as many Hispanics in Northern California where all this took place. They were still more congregated down south. The riot with the Pajaro River Bridge was Watsonville, California. Where the heck is Watsonville? It's near Salinas. Remember how in middle school you had to read that book, The Red Pony, or you saw the movie or read the book, The Grapes of Wrath? That's Steinbeck. He lived in that whole Salinas, Watsonville area just south of San Jose and about 100 miles south of San Francisco. The riots took place in multiple locations. They took place in Santa Clara County, where I live. The bombing of the club took place in Stockton, California. There were riots in Exeter, California, which is a really tiny little town. I wanted to clarify a couple of things. One of the things I wanted to talk about was the taxi clubs. This isn't the same model that they use in Filipino bars that have women. Yeah, you know the ones I mean. Taxi clubs were pay a dime, get a dance. I drove up to El Viso, which is 15 miles each way, to get a video of a former dance hall that was used by the Filipinos. Unfortunately, it collapsed in 2017 and no one sent me the memo. It's a vacant lot. This is a legacy picture of it, and this is where the dock workers and agricultural workers in El Viso would go off and probably get their taxi dances. This is not meant to be condemning any one person for something that happened 100 years ago. My great grandfather was a police officer in Boston. He was Scottish. And in 1890, he couldn't get a job as a police officer unless he lied and said he was Irish. There have always been problems, but a lot of us are here and we're getting along with the Filipinos now. So hopefully we won't have a repeat of 100 years ago.